There is a specific kind of betrayal that doesn't leave a scar on your skin, but instead, it rips the floor out from under your feet while you're still trying to stand. People say a mother's love is a sanctuary, a place where the storm can't reach you, a fortress where you are always welcome. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the mother is the storm herself. And sometimes she is the one holding the key to the door while you're shivering outside in the dark, wondering why the person who gave you life is the one taking it away from your child. My name is Chloe Miller. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 3 years, I've spent my days as a lead architect in Seattle, designing skyscrapers, structures engineered to withstand earthquakes and gale force winds. It's ironic, really. I can secure a 100-ton beam of steel against a natural disaster, but I couldn't protect my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, from the woman who raised me. My husband, Mark, passed away 3 years ago in a construction accident that still feels like it happened this morning. He was the kind of man who would spend 4 hours fixing a toy just to see Lily smile for 4 seconds. When he left us, I was broken, drowning in grief and a high-pressure career. That's when my mother, Beatrice, stepped in. Or at least, that's what I thought. I started paying her a monthly allowance of $5,000. A thank you for being the grandmother Lily needed while I worked 60-hour weeks. I thought I was buying security. I thought I was building a support system. I didn't realize I was just funding my own daughter's nightmare. Before I take you into that kitchen, please take a moment to subscribe and like the video. It helps our community more than you know. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. Mark didn't just buy our house, he breathed life into it. In the Seattle suburbs, where the rain hums a constant melody against the window panes, our home stood as a testament to what a man can build when he loves his family. Mark was a general contractor by trade, but in his soul, he was an artist. He spent 6 months hand-sanding the oak floors because he wanted them to feel soft under Lily's bare feet. He installed a bay window in the kitchen specifically because he knew I liked to watch the sunset while I drank my evening tea. To anyone else, it was just a 3-bedroom ranch. To me, it was a fortress of safety. Then came November 14th. The date is etched into my mind like a scar. A freak accident at a high-rise construction site, a snapped cable, a falling beam, and in the time it takes to blink, my world collapsed. I didn't just lose my husband that day. I lost the person who held the ladder of my life steady. Lily was only 3. She still asks why Daddy's truck isn't in the driveway on Fridays. I spent the first year after his death in a fog, a ghost haunting my own hallways. But life for the living doesn't stop for grief. I was a junior architect at one of the biggest firms in the city, and the only way to keep the house and provide for Lily was to bury myself in my work. That's when the fragile peace began. My mother, Beatrice, moved into a condo just 10 minutes away. At first, it seemed like a godsend. "You're so busy, Chloe," she'd say, her voice dripping with a practiced maternal concern. "You shouldn't have to worry about childcare. I'm your mother. I'll be your rock." But rocks have a weight, and I soon realized I was the one carrying it. Beatrice hadn't worked a day in 20 years. She lived on the legacy of being a mother, a title she treated like a high-paying executive position. Within a month, we made an arrangement. I would pay her a monthly allowance of $5,000. $5,000. That's more than some families earn in 2 months, but I justified it. I told myself it was for Lily's comfort. I told myself I was paying for the peace of mind that only a grandmother could provide. Beatrice didn't take the money with a "thank you." She took it with a sigh, as if the amount was a personal insult to her sacrifices. She began to treat my house like her own personal country club. She'd show up at 8 a.m. sharp, dressed in expensive cashmere sweaters, paid for by me, and immediately start critiquing the way I lived. "The counters are sticky, Chloe. Mark wouldn't have liked this clutter. You really need to hire a better professional cleaner." She never picked up a rag herself. She was the supervisor of a life she didn't have to fund. I watched the money leave my account every month on the 1st, a digital clink of $5,000 moving from my hard-earned salary to her account. And what did I get for it? I got a mother who spent her afternoons at high-end spas and charity luncheons where she'd brag about how she was sacrificing her retirement to help her poor, widowed daughter. Beatrice's personality was a cold front moving through a warm room. She was obsessed with status. She believed that children should be seen and not heard, a philosophy that didn't sit well with a bubbly, inquisitive 6-year-old like Lily. "She's too loud, Chloe. She needs more discipline. She's becoming spoiled." My mother would snap whenever Lily laughed too hard or left a toy on the rug. Beatrice didn't see a grieving child who missed her father. She saw a project that needed to be managed with a firm, cold hand. I saw the red flags. I saw the way Lily would quiet down the moment Beatrice walked through the front door. I saw the way my mother looked at my success, not with pride, but with a calculating eye, as if every promotion I got was just a reason to ask for a bonus on her allowance. But I was the load-bearing wall of this family. I thought that if I just kept paying, if I just kept working, the structure would hold. I didn't realize that Beatrice was termite-damaged wood, eating away at the very foundation of my daughter's safety while I was away designing the world. The piece was fragile because it was bought. And as any architect will tell you, a structure built on a bad foundation is just a disaster waiting for the right storm to hit. In the world of architecture, there are moments that define a career, projects that separate the draftsmen from the visionaries. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday in late October, just as the Seattle gray was settling into a permanent mist. It was a phone call from a prestigious firm in Manhattan. They were looking for someone to consult on a sustainable high-rise project near the High Line, and my name had been at the top of their list. It was a 10-day contract, but it wasn't just about the money. It was the kind of opportunity that Mark and I had toasted to over cheap champagne when we were interns. But as I hung up the phone, the excitement didn't feel like a spark. It felt like a weight. 10 days. 10 days away from Lily. 10 days of leaving my sanctuary in the hands of a woman who treated my daughter like a messy inconvenience. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching Lily color at the oak table Mark had built. She was using a blunt purple crayon to draw what she called Daddy's boat. She looked so small against the backdrop of our life, and for a second, I considered saying no. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe," Beatrice had snapped when I mentioned the trip over our weekly lunch, a lunch I paid for at a bistro where the salads cost $40. "This is what you've worked for. And besides, I'm here. I've raised a child, haven't I? Though clearly I could have done better with the discipline part." She laughed, that dry, hollow sound that never reached her eyes. She made it sound like she was doing me a grand favor, even though the $5,000 check for November was already sitting in her designer handbag. The 3 days leading up to my flight were a blur of frantic preparation. I am an architect. I live by the blueprint. I created what I thought was a foolproof structure for Lily's safety. I bought a new blue binder and filled it with 12 pages of typed instructions. I listed everything: Lily's allergy to walnuts, the exact temperature she liked her bathwater, the 3 books we read before bed, and the fact that she needed her nightlight on the soft amber setting because the white light gave her bad dreams. I walked Beatrice through the house on Friday evening, the binder in my hand like a shield. "Mom, please, just follow this. She's sensitive right now. She still has nights where she wakes up crying for Mark." Beatrice didn't even look at the binder. She was busy critiquing the dust on top of my refrigerator. "Honestly, Chloe, you're so dramatic. It's a child, not a delicate glass sculpture. I'll feed her, I'll clothe her, and I'll make sure she doesn't burn the house down. You act like I'm a stranger." But that was the thing. In many ways, Beatrice was a stranger to the life I had built. She was a woman who valued the appearance of a clean house over the sound of a happy child. The morning of my departure was cold. The rain was drumming a steady, rhythmic beat against the roof, a sound that usually comforted me, but now felt like a warning. I knelt down in the foyer, pulling Lily into a hug that I didn't want to end. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the faint scent of the cinnamon oatmeal she'd had for breakfast. "I'll call you every night at 7ish, okay? Right before bed," I whispered into her hair. "And Grandma is going to be here to play games and have fun." Lily didn't pull away. She leaned into me, her small hands clutching the back of my coat. "Can we call Daddy too?" she asked, her voice muffled. My heart broke right there on the oak floor. "We'll talk to him in our hearts, baby. I promise." I stood up and saw Beatrice standing by the door, her coat already on, her arms crossed. She looked like a supervisor waiting for a shift change, not a grandmother saying goodbye to her daughter. She didn't offer a hug or a word of encouragement. She just checked her watch. "You'll miss your flight, Chloe. Go. We'll be fine. Won't we, Lily?" Lily nodded, but she didn't smile. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked back in the rearview mirror. My mother was already closing the front door, the heavy oak frame shutting out the light. I watched the house disappear into the Seattle mist, a feeling of dread coiling in my stomach like a cold spring. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the $5,000 a month bought me the right to be a professional. I was at 35,000 feet, heading toward the bright lights of New York, thinking I was building a future. I didn't realize that the moment that door clicked shut, the woman I trusted had already started tearing down the present. The sound of a taxi pulling out of a driveway is a very specific kind of punctuation. It's the period at the end of a sentence that says, "You are now alone." For me, as I headed toward SeaTac Airport, that sound represented a career milestone. But for my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, it was the sound of the cage door sliding into place. I've spent a lot of time looking at the Ring camera footage from that Monday morning. I've watched it so many times that the timestamps are burned into my retinas. 8:42 a.m. That was the exact second the mask fell. As soon as my car turned the corner, Beatrice didn't go back inside to finish her coffee. She stood on the porch, her arms crossed over her cashmere sweater, watching the empty road with a look of pure, cold calculation. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a landlord who had finally evicted a tenant she never liked. When she finally turned to go inside, she didn't call Lily to come for breakfast. She barked a command. "Lily, in the kitchen, now." In my house, we have a mudroom. Mark built it with built-in cubbies for Lily's shoes and a low bench so she could sit down to tie her laces. It was designed for comfort, but under Beatrice's management, that mudroom became the first station of the cross. The blue binder I had painstakingly typed out, the one with the nightlight instructions and the allergy warnings, was the first thing to go. I watched the footage later of Beatrice picking it up, glancing at the favorite bedtime stories page with a sneer, and sliding it into the back of the pantry behind the oversized flour bins. She didn't need a manual. She had her own servant ledger already written in her head. Monday morning started with the floors. Our kitchen has white tile, pristine, expensive, and notoriously difficult to keep spotless. Usually, I'd let Lily help me with a damp cloth, making a game out of it. Beatrice didn't play games. She handed my 6-year-old a bucket of water mixed with harsh, industrial-strength pine sol and a stiff scrub brush. "If you're old enough to have your own playroom, you're old enough to earn your keep," Beatrice told her. I heard those words on the internal nursery monitor recordings. My daughter, whose biggest responsibility up until that point was remembering to put her crayons back in the box, was told to get on her hands and knees. Lily is a pleaser. She has Mark's heart, the kind that assumes if someone is unhappy, it's because she hasn't tried hard enough to make them smile. So she scrubbed. She scrubbed until her small knuckles were raw and pink from the cold water. She scrubbed until her back ached, a pain no 6-year-old should even have a word for. And Beatrice? She sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through high-end furniture websites on her iPad, occasionally tapping the tile with the toe of her designer shoe. "You missed a spot by the refrigerator, Lily. Do it again. And don't you dare cry. Crying is for the weak, and I didn't raise a weak daughter, so I certainly won't tolerate a weak granddaughter." By Tuesday, the discipline had expanded. Beatrice decided that the $5,000 I was paying her wasn't enough compensation for the emotional labor of being in the same house as a child. She started ordering out, expensive sushi, Italian catering, steak dinners, all charged to the emergency credit card I'd left for Lily's needs. While Beatrice sat in the dining room under the crystal chandelier, Lily was given a bowl of plain white rice at the counter. "Grandma, can I have some chicken?" Lily asked on the second night. "Chicken is for people who contribute, Lily. Did you finish dusting the baseboards in the guest wing?" "My fingers hurt, Grandma." "Then work faster. Speed numbs the pain." That was the philosophy of the woman I had trusted with my world. She was treating my home like a labor camp and my daughter like the help. But the worst part wasn't just the physical labor. It was the psychological erosion. Beatrice began a systematic campaign to make Lily feel like an intruder in her own home. She moved Lily's favorite stuffed elephant, the one Mark had bought her the day she was born, into the dark corner of the attic, claiming it was unsanitary for the living room. She turned off the soft amber nightlight I had insisted on, telling Lily that big girls don't need props to sleep. I called every night at 7 p.m., just like I promised, but I never talked to my daughter. Not really. "Oh, she's tuckered out, Chloe," Beatrice would say into the phone, her voice shifting back into that melodic maternal hum the moment she heard my voice. "We had such a big day at the park. She's already fast asleep. You know how she is. Once she hits the pillow, she's out for the count." I was 3,000 miles away in a glass office in Manhattan, feeling a twinge of guilt for being a working mom, while in reality, my daughter was sitting 3 feet away from Beatrice, her mouth covered by her grandmother's hand, tears streaming down her face because she wasn't allowed to say, "I love you," to her mommy. Beatrice would glare at her until the call ended, then hiss, "If you tell her I'm being mean, she'll never come back. She's in New York because she's tired of taking care of you. Do you want her to be even more tired?" It's the ultimate weapon to use against a child, the fear of abandonment. Beatrice wielded it like a scalpel. By Thursday, Beatrice had moved on to the antique china. I have a set of Waterford crystal and hand-painted porcelain that belonged to Mark's grandmother. It's kept in a locked hutch because a single chip would destroy 100 years of history. Beatrice decided this was the perfect training for a 6-year-old's motor skills. She made Lily stand on a step stool over the porcelain sink, washing each piece by hand with a warning that every plate was worth more than your toys. The tension in the house was a physical thing. You can see it in the way Lily moves in the footage, shoulders hunched, head down, taking up as little space as humanly possible. She was becoming the quiet daughter that the sources talk about, the kind whose silence isn't obedience but a survival strategy. On Friday afternoon, I watched a clip where Beatrice was on the phone with one of her friends from the country club. She was leaning back on my velvet sofa, a glass of expensive wine in her hand. "Oh, it's exhausting, Deborah," she sighed into the receiver. "Chloe has absolutely spoiled the girl. I'm having to do a complete overhaul of her character. She's quite stubborn, you know, just like her father's side, but I'm making progress. By the time Chloe gets back, she won't even recognize the child. I'm finally bringing some class to this household." She wasn't bringing class. She was bringing trauma. She was taking a house that Mark had built with hand-sanded oak and love, and she was turning it into a cold, clinical museum where the only thing that mattered was the absence of dust and the presence of fear. Lily was no longer a child in that house. She was a ghost. She spent her days scrubbing, dusting, and being lectured on the burden she was to everyone around her. She was told that her mother was only working so hard because Lily was so expensive to keep. She was told that her father would be ashamed of how messy she was. As the weekend approached and the storm clouds began to gather over Seattle, Lily was a shell of herself. She had stopped asking for stories. She had stopped drawing Daddy's boat. She just waited for the next command, the next bucket of water, the next cold look. She was waiting for me to come home, but she had been told so many times that I didn't want to, that she started to believe it. Beatrice was standing in the center of the kitchen on Saturday morning, looking at a small smudge on the window that Lily had spent 20 minutes cleaning. "Do it again," Beatrice said, her voice a flat, dead line. "And this time, Do it like you actually care about someone other than yourself. The storm was coming. Not just the rain and the wind that would eventually lock my daughter out in the cold, but the storm of a mother's reckoning. Beatrice thought she was building a disciplined legacy. She didn't realize she was just documenting her own downfall, one scrub brush stroke at a time. Saturday night in Seattle doesn't just rain, it breathes. The wind off the sound carries a weight that presses against the windows, a rhythmic drumming that usually sounds like a lullaby. But on that specific Saturday, at exactly 10:14 p.m., the rain sounded like a warning I was too far away to hear. In my house, the lights were low, but the kitchen was illuminated with a cold, clinical glow. Beatrice was sitting at the mahogany table, a glass of expensive Merlot in her hand, a bottle she'd taken from the cellar Mark had stocked for our 10th anniversary. Lily was standing at the sink. At 6 years old, 10 o'clock at night is a time for dreams, for the soft amber glow of a nightlight and the smell of freshly laundered sheets. Instead, my daughter was standing on a plastic step stool, her small frame trembling with a fatigue that no child should ever know. Her work for the night wasn't done. Beatrice had decided that the Waterford crystal jug, the one Mark's grandmother had carried across the Atlantic, needed to be hand-polished before Sunday morning. "Careful, Lily," Beatrice's voice drifted from the table, sharp and thin like a wire. "That jug is worth more than every toy you've ever owned. It's a piece of history. Unlike you, it has value." I've watched the footage of this moment 100 times. I've zoomed in on Lily's face. Her eyes were heavy, her pruny fingers slipping against the soapy glass. She was trying so hard. She was being the quiet daughter who hoped that if she just finished this one last thing, she might finally be allowed to sleep. But the soap was slick, and her grip was weak. The sound it made wasn't a crash. It was a high, crystalline ping that shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds across the white tile floor. Silence followed. The kind of silence that happens right before a bomb goes off. Lily froze, her hands still shaped like she was holding the jug, her eyes wide with a terror that haunts my sleep to this day. Beatrice didn't move at first. She just stared at the shards. Then she stood up. She didn't scream. Screaming is for people who have lost control. Beatrice was in perfect, terrifying control. "You clumsy, ungrateful little brat," she whispered. The whisper was worse than a shout. It carried the weight of every check I'd ever written her, every ounce of trust I'd misplaced. "You break the only thing of value in this house? You think you can just exist here, eating my food and costing your mother money and then destroy our legacy?" Lily started to sob. "I'm sorry, Grandma. It was an accident. My hands were slippery." "Accidents are for people who care, Lily. You don't care. You're just like your father, broken and useless." Beatrice didn't help her down from the stool. She grabbed Lily by the upper arm, a grip so tight I could see the skin whiten on the camera feed. She dragged my daughter toward the mudroom, past the cubbies Mark had built, past the bench where Lily's shoes were lined up in perfect, fearful rows. The storm outside was at its peak. The wind was howling, whipping the branches of the old oak tree against the siding. Beatrice reached for the heavy oak front door, the door that was supposed to keep the world out and the love in. She twisted the deadbolt. "If you want to act like a wild animal who can't handle nice things, you can live like one," Beatrice hissed. She pushed Lily out into the blackness. My 6-year-old daughter, wearing nothing but her thin cotton pajamas and socks, was thrust into a 48-degree Seattle rainstorm. The rain hit her instantly, drenching her hair, turning her pajamas into a cold, wet shroud. Lily turned around, her hands reaching for the handle, her voice lost in the roar of the wind. "Grandma, please, it's cold, I'm sorry." Beatrice looked at her through the glass pane for 3 seconds. Then she closed the white wooden shutter and clicked the lock. Click. That sound. I hear it in my dreams. The sound of a grandmother locking a child out in a storm because of a piece of glass. Beatrice walked back into the kitchen, picked up her wine glass, and began to browse a travel website for cruises to the Mediterranean. She didn't look back. She didn't check the window. She just sat there, basking in the discipline she had finally enforced. Outside, Lily was huddled against the porch railing. The rain was torrential, the kind of downpour that stings the skin. She tried to knock, but her hands were too cold to make a sound. She eventually crawled behind the large ceramic planters near the steps, trying to find some shield from the wind. She was clutching her arms, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely breathe. She was 6. She was alone. And she believed in that moment that she was being punished because she wasn't useful enough to be loved. Beatrice thought she was teaching a lesson. She thought she was the one in power because she held the key and the bank account was full. She didn't realize that the storm wasn't just outside. The storm was me, and I was already on my way home, 3 hours ahead of schedule, with a heart full of a mother's rage and a phone full of the evidence that would end Beatrice's comfortable life forever. The rain continued to fall, but the fragile peace was gone. The jug wasn't the only thing that had shattered that night. The very idea of mother had been broken, and there was no way to glue the pieces back together. I landed at SeaTac International Airport at exactly 11:42 p.m. on Saturday. My contract in New York had wrapped up 3 hours ahead of schedule, and instead of taking the Sunday morning flight as planned, I'd managed to snag the last standby seat on a red-eye. I didn't call Beatrice. I wanted to walk into that house, pick up my sleeping daughter, and feel the weight of my world finally back in balance. I thought about the blue binder in the pantry. I thought about the cinnamon oatmeal we'd have for breakfast. I thought I was coming home to a sanctuary. The drive from the airport to our suburb usually takes 22 minutes if the lights cooperate. That night, the rain was so thick it felt like driving through a lake. The wipers on my Subaru were squeaking, a rhythmic, high-pitched protest against the torrential downpour that I had been meaning to fix for months. It's funny the things you remember when your life is about to tilt on its axis. I remember the smell of my own damp coat and the way the green lights of the dashboard reflected in the puddles on the road. I felt a surge of professional pride. The New York project was a success. I was Chloe Miller, the lead architect, the woman who had just secured her family's future. I didn't know I was driving toward the wreckage of my daughter's present. I pulled into the driveway at 12:14 a.m. The house was dark, except for the porch light that cast a sickly yellow glow over the rain-slicked driveway. I sat in the car for a second, letting the engine idle. Something felt off. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was the lack of them. The house looked too still, like a museum after hours. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped out, the cold Seattle air biting through my blazer instantly. As I walked toward the front porch, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the rain. It was a small, ragged gasp, the sound a person makes when they've run out of breath to cry. "Lily," I whispered. I stopped near the large ceramic planters by the steps, and then I saw her. My 6-year-old daughter was huddled behind the hydrangea bushes, her small frame tucked into the corner where the porch railing meets the siding of the house. She was wearing her thin cotton Disney pajamas, now a dark, heavy gray from the water. Her hair was matted to her forehead, and her skin, usually so warm and full of life, was a translucent, terrifying blue under the porch light. She wasn't even shivering anymore. She was vibrating with a deep, bone-chilling cold that had gone past the point of trembling. "Mommy!" The word was barely a breath. She didn't move toward me. She didn't jump up. She stayed in her ball, her arms wrapped around her knees, looking at me with eyes that were too wide, too hollow. I dropped my suitcase in the mud. I didn't care about the New York contracts or the expensive blazer. I fell to my knees in the wet mulch and pulled her into my arms. She was like a block of ice. Her pajamas were frozen against her skin, and she smelled like wet earth and ozone and pure, unadulterated terror. "Lily, baby, what happened? Why are you out here? Where is Grandma?" "I broke the jug, Mommy," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I broke the glass jug. And Grandma said I was useless. She said animals belong outside. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I looked at the heavy oak door. It was locked. The deadbolt was turned. My mother, the woman I had paid $5,000 to protect this child, had locked a 6-year-old out in a 48-degree storm over a piece of Waterford crystal. I didn't scream. Not yet. I didn't have the breath for it. I stood up, clutching Lily against my chest, her wet weight dragging at my arms. I marched to the door and began to pound on it with my free hand. I didn't use the key. I wanted Beatrice to open this door. I wanted her to see what she had done before I dismantled her life piece by piece. Beatrice, open this door, now. Inside, a light flickered on. The white wooden shutter on the window moved slightly. I saw my mother's face peek out, startled, annoyed, and then, for a split second, paralyzed with a guilt she couldn't hide. The door clicked open. Beatrice stood there in her silk robe, a glass of wine still in her hand. She looked at me, then at the drenched blue child in my arms. "Chloe, you're early. I was giving her a time out. She was being incredibly difficult. You wouldn't believe the mess." I didn't let her finish. I pushed past her, my boots leaving muddy tracks on the hand-sanded oak floors Mark had dyed to provide for us. I didn't look back at her. I went straight to the bathroom, turned on the warm water, and began the slow, agonizing process of thawing out my daughter's heart. The fragile piece wasn't just broken, it was gone. And as I wrapped Lily in a warm towel, I knew that by dawn, Beatrice would find out exactly what happens when you treat an architect's daughter like a servant. The kitchen was warm now, but the air felt thin, like we were breathing in the aftermath of a fire. I had Lily wrapped in 3 layers of heated blankets on the sofa, a cup of cocoa between her hands that she was too tired to drink. She had finally stopped shaking, but her eyes were fixed on the floor, avoiding the spot where the Waterford jug had shattered. My mother, Beatrice, had retreated to the guest room, probably rehearsing her defense or checking her bank balance one last time. She thought the silence meant she'd won. She thought because I hadn't screamed, I was accepting her version of discipline. She was wrong. I wasn't screaming because I was calculating. I am an architect. I don't build on hope. I build on data. And in 2026, data is the ultimate weapon. I sat at the mahogany kitchen table, the same table where my mother had sipped my wine while my daughter froze, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was a cold, clinical blue in the dim room. I logged into the Ring security system. We have cameras everywhere. The porch, the foyer, the kitchen, even the backyard. Mark had installed them for safety. He wanted to know Lily was okay when he was working late. I wonder if he knew that one day these cameras would be the only witnesses to her betrayal. I started at the beginning, October 26th, the day I left. I watched the timestamp at the bottom of the screen, 8:42 a.m. I watched my car pull away, and then I watched Beatrice's face change. It was like watching a mask melt in real time. I saw the first time she handed Lily the scrub brush. I saw the plain bowls of rice. I saw my daughter's small shoulders sag more and more with every passing hour. Then I skipped to Saturday, 10:14 p.m. Watching it was a physical pain. I saw Lily standing on that rickety stool. I saw the jug slip. I saw the way Beatrice didn't even flinch at the sound of the crash. She just moved toward my child like a predator. I saw her grab Lily's arm. I saw the heavy oak door open, and I saw my mother push a 6-year-old girl into a pitch-black storm. The audio was the worst part. Lily's voice, muffled by the wind, crying for a grandmother who was already walking back to the couch to scroll through cruise listings. I didn't cry. My eyes were as dry as the blueprints on my desk. I clicked download on every single clip. One by one, the files moved from the cloud to my hard drive. I labeled the folder, The Truth. In my world, these weren't just videos. They were the structural failure reports of a family. They were the evidence that would justify every cold decision I was about to make. Beatrice thought she was the one with the power because she held the key. She didn't realize that I held the ledger, and according to my calculations, she was bankrupt. The sun rose over Seattle on Sunday morning with a clarity that felt insulting. The rain had stopped, leaving the world looking washed and renewed, but inside my kitchen, the air was stagnant with the smell of damp wool and old lies. I was sitting at the oak table, a cup of coffee in front of me that had gone cold an hour ago. Lily was upstairs, finally asleep in my bed, her small hand clutching my old t-shirt like a life raft. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night watching the digital record of my mother's cruelty, and now I was just waiting for the performance to begin. At 8:15 a.m., Beatrice walked into the kitchen. She was wearing a cream-colored silk robe, a gift I'd bought her for Mother's Day, and her hair was perfectly pinned back. She looked refreshed, as if she hadn't spent the previous night terrorizing a 6-year-old. She reached for the kettle, her movements graceful and practiced. "I hope you've calmed down, Chloe," she said, her back to me. "I know it looked dramatic, but you've always been prone to overreacting. That jug was an heirloom. Lily needed to understand that there are consequences for being careless. I was only doing what you're too soft to do, providing discipline." I didn't answer. I just watched her. I watched the way she moved with such entitlement in a house she didn't own, fueled by money she didn't earn. "Did you hear me?" she snapped, finally turning around. Her eyes flickered to the laptop on the table, then back to me. "You're being very quiet, and frankly, it's rude. I've sacrificed my entire week to help you. I think I deserve a little more respect than a cold shoulder." "Sacrifice," I said. The word felt heavy on my tongue. "Let's talk about the price of that sacrifice, Beatrice. Let's talk about $5,000 a month. That's $60,000 a year. It's enough to put Lily through college twice. It's enough to pay for a professional nanny, a chef, and a housekeeper. But I gave it to you. I gave it to you because I thought family meant a safety net. I didn't realize I was paying for a predator." Beatrice's face hardened. "How dare you? I am your mother." "And I am Lily's mother," I said, my voice dropping to that level of quiet that people mistake for weakness. I turned the laptop screen toward her. "And this is the record of what you did while I was designing high-rises in New York." I hit play. The kitchen went silent, except for the sound of the recording. Beatrice watched herself drag Lily by the arm. She watched herself lock the door. She watched Lily shivering behind the planters while she sat right here at this very table, drinking my wine and looking at cruises. I saw her throat move as she swallowed hard. For the first time, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I was trying to teach her." "You were trying to break her," I interrupted. "You used my money to fund a 10-day campaign of terror against a child who is still grieving her father. You took the security Mark worked his whole life to provide and you turned it into a prison. You told her she wasn't useful. You told her I didn't want her." I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the banking app. "You think you're in control because you have the key to the door, Beatrice, but I'm an architect. I know exactly which walls are load-bearing, and in your life, I am the only wall holding up the roof." I opened the scheduled transfers. "Chloe, wait. Let's be reasonable. You can't just—" "I'm being very reasonable," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. The transfer for November was scheduled for midnight. $5,000. It's currently 8:24 a.m. I'm canceling it. I tapped the screen. Click. I'm also canceling the December transfer, and January, and every month after that. As of this second, Beatrice, you are no longer a beneficiary of my hard work. You are no longer the supervisor of this house. You have 2 hours to pack your things and go to that condo I've been subsidizing. Because next week, that's going on the market too. If you want a luxury lifestyle, you can find someone else to terrorize for it." The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was the sound of my mother realizing she had finally pushed the quiet daughter too far. She looked at the phone, then at the laptop, and for once, she had no script left to follow. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already did," I said. "Now get out of my kitchen." Beatrice didn't leave with a bang. She left with the hollow, scraping sound of a suitcase being dragged across the floor she had forced my daughter to scrub. As an architect, I know that when a structure's main support is removed, the collapse is inevitable, but I was surprised by how quickly her world turned to dust. You see, the $5,000 a month wasn't just an allowance to her, it was her identity. It was the monthly premium she paid to maintain the illusion of a woman of class and high standing. Without it, she was just a woman with a cold heart and an empty bank account. The first week after I evicted her from my home and my life, Beatrice tried to play the only card she had left, the victim card. She called my Aunt Martha, her sister Linda, and even our old family pastor. She told them I had abandoned her in her old age, that I was hysterical and unstable since Mark passed away. She was weaving a narrative of a cruel daughter and a saintly grandmother. She expected the family to rally around her, to pressure me back into the role of her personal ATM. But she forgot one thing. I had the receipts. I didn't argue with her on the phone. I didn't send angry texts. I simply uploaded the Ring camera footage, the entire 10 days, into a shared folder and sent the link to every person she had called. I titled it, The 10-Day Residency. I let the video of her pushing a shivering 6-year-old into the rain be her only introduction. The silence that followed in the family group chat was the loudest sound I've ever heard. One by one, the likes and prayers for Beatrice disappeared. My Aunt Martha sent me a single text. "I am so sorry we didn't see it sooner. Keep the door locked, Chloe." The financial fallout was clinical. Within 30 days, Beatrice's lifestyle began to fracture. The $700 a month leased Lexus was the first to go. She couldn't make the payment without my transfer. She was seen at the local grocery store, not the high-end organic boutique she loved, but the discount warehouse, waiting in line with coupons. The wellness retreats and the charity luncheons were replaced by the harsh reality of a fixed Social Security check that barely covered her utilities. I eventually sold the condo I had been subsidizing for her. I gave her 30 days' notice through a lawyer. No personal calls, no emotional pleas. She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, a place where the walls are thin and there are no Waterford jugs to polish. She spent her days trying to explain to anyone who would listen that it was all a misunderstanding. But in a small town like ours, the truth is a slow walker that always reaches its destination. Beatrice had spent years building a facade of class, but in the end, she was exposed as the woman who traded her granddaughter's safety for a piece of glass. She was alone, not because I was cruel, but because she had finally run out of people to manipulate. It's been 6 months since that rainy Saturday night. In Seattle, the mist still clings to the windows and the rain still hums against the roof, but the air inside my home finally feels light. Lily is drawing again. Bright, colorful pictures of Daddy's boat that now hang proudly on the refrigerator with no fear of being called clutter. Her laughter isn't a secret anymore. It's the melody that fills our hallways. We still have those white tiles in the kitchen, but now, if a glass slips or a plate chips, we just pick up the pieces together. In this house, no one is required to be useful to be worthy of love. Beatrice sent a letter last week. It wasn't an apology. People like her rarely find the breath for those, but a long list of complaints about how her new apartment is beneath her status. I didn't write back. I've realized that being a mother isn't about a title or a bloodline. It's about the sanctuary you provide. That $5,000 monthly allowance doesn't fund cruises or designer cashmere anymore. It goes into a high-yield college fund for Lily, a foundation for her future that is being built brick by brick on a ground that will never give way. I am an architect by trade, but the structure I am most proud of isn't made of steel or hand-sanded oak. It's the safety I reclaimed for my daughter. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with us. I have one question for you, and I want you to be honest in the comments. If you found your child shivering in the dark because of someone you trusted, what is the first thing you would cancel? I read every single story you share. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more stories about women who refuse to stay quiet.